audio.
You're right, it does do it automatically. Hopefully, hopefully everybody can is seeing the right screen. It's always mess up the presentation stuff. But we are going to get started in a little while, just waiting for see anybody else who needs to come in. So yeah, we'll be getting started momentarily. Okay, let's see. Like I said, just 2, 3 more minutes, and then we're gonna jump in. Okay. Um, we'll just go ahead and jump on in. We have definitely a lot of stuff to cover, and I just want to make sure everybody has enough time to ask any questions or anything like that in the meantime, because it's a lot. So, uh, everybody who's here, welcome. This is the technical assistant webinar using all of us researcher Workbench. This is hosted through Charles Drew University and by CCPH. And I am Dr. Javon Carter, just call me Javon. And I work at RTI, which is Research Triangle Institute. And yeah, I'm going to be going through all the ins and outs that I can think of that will be beneficial to most people here on this webinar, from what all of us is, the basics behind the cloud computing that's it's associated with, and then doing a strong outline into all the technical aspects that we're going to be going through within all of us. And immediately after that, so basically within the next 10 minutes, we're going to be diving directly into the workbench and just looking at it and seeing how everything works. I really, really, really want people to talk and ask questions. So at any time, you can jump off mute and ask some questions. It's completely fine. I promise you, it won't throw me off. And we're just gonna go about it that way because I want people to get as much as they want and need out of this. And since I don't know anybody on here or everybody on here, I think this might be the best way of doing it. Oh, okay. Oh, one last thing I want to say. I am coming off of a cold, so if I'm probably gonna be coughing a lot, I apologize in advance. But yeah, I've been trying to work through all the mucus and whatnot this past weekend, and it's been kicking my butt. So, all right. Okay, before we jump into everything, I just want to give a quick shout out to the team. Um, which is me, Trey Rashad, Stephanie Tillman, Iris Glaze, Barrett Montgomery, Dr. Barrett Montgomery, Sherry, Katz, um, uh, Leslie, which I'm not going to butcher her last name, but I love Leslie. And then Dr. Megan Lewis, then there's tons of other individuals like Dr. Brian Southwell and Dr. Sula Hood. But these are the main individuals that I work with day in, day out at RTI. But the first group are the coaches, the workbench coaches, and we all work with different HBCUs or MSIs, just trying to help and assist people as much as possible with navigating through the workbench and going through whatever research analyses that they want to go through. So I just want to highlight that. Unfortunately, I didn't have a good picture I didn't have a picture of Barrett, so I'm gonna have to fix that in the future. But that's the crew. All right. So diving in, the first thing I like to do is hold on. Let me mute this. All right. So the first thing I like to do is break down RTI, all of us, and how everything kind of fits into it. First things first, all of us is a product of NIH and Vanderbilt University. NIH being the government, and then Vanderbilt being, Ivy League. Vanderbilt, we all know where Vanderbilt is and what it is. But Vanderbilt oversees the overall structure and the technical aspects within the product of all of us. But then NIH funds project as a whole, or funded the project as a whole. The company and what I do is an exterior source from all of us as a whole, but we engage with and work with all of us in the platform so that people can feel comfortable and get and be have better accessibility to it. So I don't work within Vanderbilt or I don't work within NIH, so I'm not getting paid through those type of sources, but as a whole, because I know that always ends up messing people up. Um, Moving forward, what is all of us? In the nutshell, because this has actually was misconstrued for a few people as well. All of us is a cloud-based platform that is using the cloud. And whenever people say the cloud, and I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence, but I've quite literally heard people think that it's satellites that just storing all the data in the satellite, which that's not the case. What's actually happening is it's several buildings or physical structures on Earth. It's probably some kind of building of some sort, several buildings. In this case, it could be at Vanderbilt, it could be other locations, but once I dive a little deeper, you'll know what I mean. But it's just located somewhere. You access the data that's in those facilities through your localized computer. So through your computer, you can tap into the resources that are in those buildings. How you use that is obviously Wi-Fi, which is just just the internet, more or less. But this is it as a whole. Trust me, it's going to get more complicated. When you think about all of us, you also have to build out and think about the structure and the entities that make up the overall hub. In this case, the overall hub is Terra, at least from what I understand, is Terra, which is owned by Google. So it's a platform within Google that takes advantage of different elements and on top of that, structures out components so that multiple people can use it successfully and safely. So when you think about it, all of us is essentially is a source of information in one area. The source of information can be accessed using Terra, and Terra is owned by Google. So there's several different elements that actually play a factor to developing out what all of us is. But in a nutshell, I want to show you this image because this is going to come into play a little bit later when you start thinking about how you actually access the data and how you store data. Again, it gets a little technical, but it's okay. I got you. So all I really want you to know for right now is that in order for you to access all of us, you always have to think about it as it's still a cloud computing, but it's an environment where you have to have an internet access, tap into it, and then get security clearance so that you can then enter into the data itself through Terra. Terra being the underlining software used for Google, because later on you're going to see a lot of Google related things, and I don't want you to get confused or conscrewed from it. You won't see anything that says Vanderbilt on anywhere. You'll either see all of us or Google. But the entities that kind of run it and oversee everything is going to be a lot of it has to do with individuals at Vanderbilt. So I want to quickly walk through that because that's something that always ends up confusing people. From here, I want to go through and start telling you about the main objects, the main objectives we'll be going through today. Again, we're going to talk about workspaces. We're going to talk about cohort builders. We're going to talk about data set builders, Jupyter Notebook, demo data, cost and billing, and how that typically gets mapped out. Then, because I know that there's a lot of people at Charles Drew that are interested in genomic research or genetic analyses, we're going to talk a little bit more about genomics and genomic file types, data types, general analyses seen within the workbench that you can take advantage of, how to access the genomic data, which that can be a little tricky for people, and then the do's and don'ts with genomic data, which because I want everybody to understand that this is a great source of information, but it's a lot of information. It can easily uh, become misused, and I don't want anybody to misuse the data. Obviously that will halter and hinder the trust that the participants are placing in our hands when it comes down to just allowing us to run analyses on so many diverse individuals. So I wanted to always like to emphasize the do's and don'ts with genomic information or information as a whole. Okay, so with that, oh, I think I saw a hand raised, but I'm not quite sure. If so, yeah, I mean, again, anybody, you can come off mute if you ever want to. It's entirely up to you all, but I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then share my screen again. But we're gonna be jumping into the workbench. So if there's any questions and concerns, let me know. But we'll be transitioning over and start getting into nitty gritty of everything. about to share my screen, and we're gonna have some fun. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I'm just looking at it over here from this angle. But yeah, this is all of us. I know sometimes when you, at least from what I've heard, people were expecting sometimes expect something a little bit more flashy, but no, this is essentially the main breakdown of it. When you first get access to all of us, this will be more or less your landing page. It'll say, "Hey, welcome to the Researcher Workbench." It'll allow you to. It'll say, the secure platform for to analyze all of us data. And like I told you, you won't see anything on here associated with Vanderbilt or anything like that. It's going to be NIH and then the research workbench. The different elements and how, or I'll say like how you go about engaging with the data itself would be through something called workspaces. What for everybody or anybody who's brand new to the workspaces or brand new to work, to all of us, you first need to create some. As you can see, I have quite a few, or at least I have access to quite a few workspaces. And so this hopefully addresses the first question most people ask, which is, are you allowed to have multiple workspaces? And the answer is yes, I can have as many as I want, as far as I understand. You can be different elements. You can be a different status on different workbenches. You could be something called a reader. You could be a writer. You could be an owner. And technically, those are the top three, but there is one other one in my head, which is I call it the primary owner. We'll talk about that in a second. But if I'm a reader on a workspace, essentially all I can do is I can go into it and I can read what is going on within the workspace. I can look at the files. I can do anything. I can do nothing else but look at. I can't erase. I can't manipulate. I can duplicate, but that's about it. When you have read access, essentially you have the somebody trusts you enough to see the data and copy the data, but nothing more than that. If you're a writer, you can see the data, you can alter the data, you can copy the data. And if you're a writer, you can do analyses with the data. So when I say alter, I mean you can actually analyze, you can create new data sets as well. With a writer, one thing to keep in mind is that if I am a writer, that means I do not own this workspace. And since I do not own this workspace, it is going to go and charge whoever owns the workspace for anything I do. So let's say hypothetically you have students and the students want to do something within your workspace. They can and they will, but if they were to accidentally spend $3,000, it's just gone. It's going to go towards the person who owns it, which probably will be the instructor at that point in time, not the student. So please be careful when you make somebody an owner versus a reader. If you want somebody just to read it and then copy the information over to their own workspace, then just make them a reader. If you are comfortable and trust the person who's doing the analyses, then you can make them a writer. And then from there, that goes into the next thing, which is the owner. There's two types of owners you can have. I can make anybody an owner of a workspace that I primarily own. So you can be the primary owner or the secondary owner. Unfortunately, the system only says owner, but the primary owner in my head is the person who created the workspace. Because even though I can make you or anybody else an owner, they will be perceived as a secondary owner in the system. It's not verbally put down, but secondary owner in the system. And when that takes place, they can do everything, include edit the overall objective of the workspace. But what they cannot do is they still can't take on ownership of the billing. So they still won't be able to visually even view or look at the billing information within the workspace. So that's why even though it's called an owner, the only person who can do that is the primary person who created the workspace from the get-go. There are ways to adjust that slightly, but that's going to go deeper into Google and how Google's interface works within all of us. But with that being said, let's go ahead and crack open and create a new workspace or show how you would create a new workspace. So first things first, this is the main page. This is always going to be the page that people go to when it comes down to making a new workspace. You type out whatever name you want to, whichever tier you want to. And all of us, there's technically 3 tiers, but once you get inside of the researcher workbench, there's only 2 primary tiers. You have the register tier, which is majority of the information, and it's sensitive information for the participants. Or when I say majority, I mean like majority of the information that participants offer that's non-genomic, uh, but it's not all of it. So if you want to get more data, or more specific data, let's say zip code information, it's not in the registered tier, it's only in the control tier. But in a registered tier, that's most of it. It's most of the information. Again, non-genomic information. If you want to do anything or look at anything in the genomic data, you have to use the control tier. And the control tier also comes with zip code data or neighborhood data on participants, which that's not genomic, but it's also a little bit more sensitive. So you need to have extra training in order to have access to that. From there, let's say we're going to do control tier because obviously we're interested in genetics potentially. And then from there, they say, hey, which version would you like? Version 5, 6, or 7. Right now, we're currently on 7. They will be rolling out version 8, I want to say in the next few months, but like I want to say literally in the next 2 or 3 months to be rolling out version 8, but I'm not entirely sure. But it is very soon, which will come with way more participants. I think they're supposed to be adding in another 100,000 individuals, and then more data as well, and different changes. But for right now, I always tell people if you're brand new, just work with the most up to date version. Do not work in version 5 or version 6 unless you're trying to replicate somebody's analysis and they started off in 5 or 6 or something like that. Other than that, stick to just the highest one. After that, you will be asked about your credits, which, as you can see, I've been in here for a while, so I have $0 right now, but that's only through the use all of us initial credits. Every single person, when they first get access to all of us, will have 300 credits or $300 worth of credits, which will slowly get chipped away at as you're doing analyses. And once it's all gone, as you can see, it's all gone. From there, you would have to go in and you can do a drop down, which you don't see it because another window popped up. Sorry, it's relogging me in. But you do a drop down, and then in the drop down, it'll ultimately ask you, um, give me a second, because this tends to happen a little bit too. So if you do the drop down, and you don't see it on my end right now, but if you were to do the drop down, you'll see, kick me out again. You'll be able to see that I have actually access to multiple different funding sources, which I established through Google. So from there, if in fact you want to have more data, not data, excuse me, more credits and more money, you can do that. But I'm not going to click this again because I don't want to kick me out again. But it can be done. This is just, it always defaults to the use all of us initial credits. So we'll talk more about that and more details about that later. And obviously, if you want to add in more, you can go to create billing account. You can create a Google billing account, and then you can then go through the process of adding in more money. Okay, just for the sake of not having to restart that again, you talk about what your primary research is going to be. For a lot of things that I'm doing right now is educational purposes, because even in this, if I were to make one, I'll click the educational purposes. I wouldn't click research. If in fact I wanted to do research, it will have a bigger drop down, and then you go into more details about it. Almost every single thing that I'm doing that's not educational is genetic research, and then I kind of have to go a little bit more details about it. And there, they ask you very simple questions that are typically asked if you're going to put together like an abstract. So, what's the specific scientific question that you intend to study? Then you write that up right here. What is the scientific approach you plan on using? You write down right here. What's the anticipated findings? Right down right here. So basically, what's your hypothesis? What's your research question? What's your overall analysis plan? What's your hypothesis and your predictions? And then from there, who or how are you distributing the information? Are you planning on writing peer review articles? Are you planning on writing blogs, social media? And then from there, it goes into a little bit more details about understanding your research outcomes and how it's going to fit into the All of Us framework or the All of Us mission statement. And then last but not least, but probably the most important thing, is going to be the population of interest. If in fact you're doing an analysis and you're looking at everybody and everything, then at that point in time, you do not need to address this question. You can just say that this is, no, my study is not centered around an underrepresented group. It's just, I'm looking in generally at a particular disease. But if you know that you're only interested in Black individuals or only interested in Hispanic individuals, or this, that, and the other, then you need to specify which ones. And then normally they won't ask for a why, especially if you already write it up in the first few sections. But you should, if you are specifying a particular group, you should talk about why up here in the top, going through some of these different sections where you can actually talk out what your thought process is. And then from there, the last thing is they go into details talking about, hey, this we're very important when it comes down to data use and use of conducting research within all of us. We don't want to stigmatize any populations or any individuals. So with all that being said, would you like for us to review your workspace and offer any feedback if you are coming across as somebody who might be stigmatizing, or the data or the results might stigmatize a particular population? If you were to click yes, all it will do is allows people, it will send it over to their review board. The review board will look at it, and it's similar to basically a doctor's visit. If you hear back from them, then you did something wrong. If you don't hear back from them, then you're fine. You're in the clear. Your test results came back good. So I almost always click yes because I just want to make sure that I'm not doing anything that might be offensive or taken in the wrong way. And if you were to click yes versus clicking no, if you click yes, it won't halt or stall anything. You will still have your workspace that can be created literally in a few seconds after you hit the create workspace button. It just, the information gets sent off. If you hit no, it just won't send it off. And then from there, you might run the risk of having issues in the future if they do go back and then find out that some things that you put in here or some things they're planning on looking into might be a little bit more negative. So I always encourage people to just hit yes. I don't see any issues with it. And then after that, you go ahead and hit create workspace. One thing I want to emphasize, which you probably noticed, is the publicly displayed. Some of the questions and how you write them out will be displayed for any and everybody on Earth to see if they have the internet. So please be careful and mindful on how you're writing this stuff up. Be how detailed you would like to be within the write-ups for it, because and your name and this information will be linked at that point in time. But yes, the other question I get a lot, can you go back and edit anything in here? And yes, you can go back and edit it. As long as you are the primary owner, you can edit whatever you want to within this page. But I didn't fill out everything because it's saying that, hey, you're leaving a lot of things blank. So we're going to hit cancel for right now. But if I filled everything out, I'll hit create, create a new workspace for me. So hypothetically, let's say this was the workspace that I created. So we're going to go inside of this one. And we are going to look at the very beginning of the workspace. With the very beginning of the workspace, again, hypothetically, we just created this from scratch. You have cohorts, you have data sets, you have data, you have analysis, you have a lot of things going on, all these things over here on the side. It sometimes can be a bit overwhelming. But I like to tell people to just focus in on the main concepts of the workbench, which is, I'm gonna say three main concepts. Number one, where and how you access the data. Number two, how you analyze the data. And then number three, basically how everything is curated or everything is structured out. The accessing of the data is essentially here. You can access the data relatively easily here between the cohorts and the data set. How you analyze the data will be over here in the analysis phase. This is where you're going into different elements of analytical files that can be used to then do whatever analysis you need to do. And then the about goes actually back to what you initially put in here for the your workspace. If I want to edit it, I can go in here and edit it, change the elements around, and then go back and hit save and go and call it a day for that. But I want to focus in on these two elements right here. Creating the cohort is normally the very next thing you should think about, because that is the cheapest, that's a free tool that you can use. And this is the tool that's going to essentially tell you how much data you have to work with depending on what you're interested in. So I just clicked on the create cohort. This is the cohort builder, and it looks very, very simple, but it's going to get really ridiculous really fast. Within the cohort builder, you have different elements and different ways you can go about talking to the data, but essentially it is putting together and running in the background a set of SQL analyses or better so SQL pools and is displaying the SQL results to you. So anybody who knows what SQL is, you'll know what I mean. If you don't know what it is, it's okay. But this is how you look at the data. Let's say I'm interested. I'm like, well, I don't know anything about all of us. I have no idea what I'm even doing, but I do know that my research has to do with age. So say, okay, well, let me look at age. I have the option of looking at people between the ages of 18 and 142, 124, 124. And if you were to move this around, you can see that this number right here changes depending on the amount of people who fit within this age range. Let's say I'm the rare researcher who only does research on people of the ages of 65 and 124, apparently. There's 144,677 people who fit within that age range. So I say, great, I want to select those individuals. I'm going to hit review. I'm going to say, yes, this is the age range I want. Go from there. From there, you see that it opened up completely now. And don't worry, all this data is still easily accessible for anybody who does or does not have access to all of this. But you see how everything changes. Now you have other groups. You have set up with group 2, you have an and or category now. You had inclusions, but now you can have exclusions. And you have a count, and the count goes through and it talks about the different race information for the individual, within the race and age of the individuals. So it gets a little bit more into the weeds. If in fact I was like, I want to look at people between this broad range, or I want to look at people maybe not deceased, maybe not deceased. We'll pick something else because we'll be positive. It's Monday, but I said, or I don't mind looking at people between the ages of 30 and 64. Why you would want to look at this range or that range is beyond me. But if you were to do that, you see that there's 206,216 people. Excuse me. It saved. If you were to do the or statement, it will show you this information or this information on the people. It's not going to discriminate between the groups and say this needs to be within here. It's going to be either or, and whichever one is the highest. If whichever one is the highest is what they're going to go with. But in this case, they're lumping both of them together because this is a completely different group than this group. Hence why basically all we did was just double the number up because we took that number and added this number to it. So I want to say double, but you know what I mean. If I didn't want to do or and I want to do and, then I'll just leave that. I'll go down here using the and, go in here, age, and trust me, I'll get into a little more things in a second. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I think I said 35 to 65. I think 64. Yes, that number looks correct. And now I can see this, and you see that originally I said I wanted to have anybody between this age, and they have to also be between this age. This age group and this age group do not overlap whatsoever. So since they do not overlap, and I use the and statement, I'm basically I'm setting in stone or setting the statement saying that this population and this one, and they have to be the same. Since that's not the case, it's going to be zeroed out. If I were to tweak this, and I go, because you can just click it and tweak it, and let me go ahead and edit it. So if I were to edit the criteria, and I changed it from, let's say, hypothetically 35 to 67. 26,000 people fall within that because technically between the ages of 65 and 67, so those 2 years, so 65, 66, 67, there's 22,000 people that fit in that. So this is how this basically works. And I'm hopefully this really simple breakdown goes into that. But I don't want this. This is just an example. But what I will do is I will add in genetics. So I want to look at people who are at the 65 and up, and who also has genomic information. And the genomic information is short read data. I want short read data because I'm not interested in long read data for right now. It shows that there are 245,000 people who have short read data. And then of the 245 people who have short read data, 88,000 of them are within the range of 65 to 124. But let's say I wanted to do that, but I only am interested in, oh, excuse me, I'm not interested in anybody, and we're going to look at demographics for right now. Anybody, uh, let's see, size, sex at birth, anybody who did not classify as a male or female, for whatever reason, we'll do it this way for right now. So I just want to look at people who sex at birth were assigned as male or female. Just to add in a random exclusion factor. So it dropped down by 2,000 people. And then from there, let's also say I'm interested in a particular condition. So I'm going to go to conditions. And I'm going to say I'm interested in maybe I'm going to say type 1. I'll just put type 1 for right now, just to see what pops up. Or actually, better yet, just because I know what I'm planning on doing. There's a particular, let's see, 250. I'm going to look at the ICD-9, ICD-10 codes for diabetes. I'm going to hit this one because this was going to cover type 1 and type 2. And now we're going to look at individuals who are between the age of 65, 124, who have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, has been diagnosed with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. So not survey data, but actual data from the EHR, who has short read sequence data, who were assigned either male or female at birth, at least based off record. Okay, and this is what we have. Essentially, we have 204 people, Asian race, 2,400 for Black or African American, a very small number for I prefer not to answer or Middle East or North African, 129 for more than one population. I don't even think we have anybody for Native Hawaiian, not indicated, none, skip, and then white race would be 6,747. This is the amount of people that fit every single one of these criteria combined. It's not an or, it's every single one of these things are matched up. I can get more specific with it, but I think we all get the gist of how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and create the cohort. And if you haven't noticed, I make a lot of dummy data sets. So I'm going to do that. Hit save. And now it's going to ask me, do you want to create another cohort? Or would you like to create a data set? So I'm going to go ahead and show you something just because this is going to be another big element that people normally get confused with this. And then from there, we're going to move on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and create the data set. I'm going over here and starting from this point, you see that there's 3 different elements when you're creating a data set. You have the select cohorts, you have the cohort concept sets, and then you have the select values. The cohorts, or at least how all of us works, and this is the part that normally gets a little bit more confusing for people, is the cohorts are quite literally you looking at concepts, you're looking at criteria, and then you're choosing individuals based off of your criteria. Once the cohort gets established, it is quite literally a list of individuals. There's nothing else in there but a list of individuals, and they're listed by their patient ID or the participant ID. A concept set is the data that you're interested in. If you remember before, when I said that I've created this cohort, this dummy cohorts 1, this is essentially anybody who is at a certain age range, who has genetic data, who has been diagnosed with diabetes, and who has been assigned at birth, male or female. That's what the individuals are. But in order for me to get that data, I need to tell it what data I want. So I need to tell it from the list of people, literally a list of person A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I want to get the demographic information. I want to get their, and this is just other concept sets. I want to get their short read sequence information. And oh no, I don't see anything on diabetes. So I'm going to create a concept for diabetes. So I'm going to go to conditions. I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to create a concept for diabetes. 250. And you don't have to do it this way. You can type in diabetes, but you make sure you type out all numbers, type out the number name. Don't put the number one. They won't know what you're doing. But I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to say, yep, I want that information. I'm going to save that concept set, and I'm going to create it as a new concept set, and I'm going to call it T1D. Now I'm going to get I'm going to get the information for T1, the type 1 diabetes is gonna say, do you want to create that? So I'm like, yes. I go back into it, demographic information, short read information, type 1 diabetes information. And then it's gonna say, okay, great. We have everything you need. And from here, you can look at all the data that you'll have access to when you create your data set and you go inside of the actual the workbench. So the Jupyter Notebook or the RStudio workbench portion of it. So I'm going to have because of the demographic information, I'm going to have the person ID, I'm going to have their gender, I'm going to have their date of birth, I'm going to have their racial information, I'm going to have the ethnicity information, their sex at birth. I'm going to have standard condition for the conditions, which in this case is type 1 diabetes. I'm going to have all the information I need for the type 1 diabetes when this condition started, when it ended, if this was one of those conditions that had a start and end date, which obviously this one typically does not. Type 2 diabetes is a little different. The condition type, the stop reason. So this goes into more details, and this is the standard information that you will get from the conditions. From there, the last but not least is for the genetic information. It defaults and says that, hey, we'll give you a VCF file that has the short read whole genome sequence data in it. This is just the default. If I were to unselect this will go away, and I still will have access to genomic data for these individuals. It's just a different way of going about collecting it. But for right now, we'll say, yes, I want to create this. If in fact everybody had access to the researcher workbench, I will click this button over here that says view preview table. That view preview table will show you what the data should look like before it brings it in officially. We're not going to click that because at that point in time, it shows sensitive information that I'm not going to display right here, especially since we're recording it too. So what I will say is that I always recommend that you click this button here so you can view what the data should look like and you can get an idea as to what you're looking at. It won't show you all the data. It'll just show you a very small snapshot of it. But anyway, I will say we're going to hypothetically hit create. We're going to give it a name. Data set 1. And hit save. And then it's going to say, hey, do you want to analyze? Now, be mindful of what this looks like. If I was doing genetic analyses, they're going to say, okay, well, since you're interested in VCF tables, what we can do is because it's within a certain number, which I believe is less than 4,000 individuals, we can create the VCF table for you. It will cost basically 2 cents per extracted sample, which that would add up quickly, but 2 cents per person is not too bad. And it would also come with the computational cost of how much it would cost to even like the time it will take to put it together. But it'll create it for you, and then they'll have it basically available for you, and it'll be that very specific amount of individuals and their genetic information, which is actually a helpful tool if you want to do something with VCF tables. If you don't and you want to do something completely else, you can look at it in a completely different way. But let's say I want to skip that, and then it's going to ask me the next question, which is, what would you like to use? We're going to default you to a Jupyter Notebook. Do you want to have the Python kernel, the R kernel, or the SAS kernel? From there, I can hit either or. And I have not seen SAS within Jupyter Notebook, so we're going to focus on R and Python. If you do anything with genomics, they're going to tell you need to use the genomic data in Python and not use R. That's just how it is, but that's the case. From there, I can add it to an existing workspace if I want to, and it'll literally just take the code and tack it to the bottom. Or I can more or less just move it over and create something brand new from scratch. When if you ever notice, when I click Python, these other options come up down here. These other options are you can have some of the you can select different tools using the Hail tools. You can use the Plink tools, or you can use other VCF compatible tools, which that could be like BCF tools or VCF tools. I don't know if VCF tools even exist anymore, because I remember I used to use that. And then from there, it also will show you the code. Now this code is just it's SQL code, so it's not gonna be detrimental if anybody sees it. But essentially, what it's gonna show you is this is what the code is gonna look like that we're gonna use to pull that information for you. So as of right now, you should hopefully be asking yourself, well, why is this code even presented? I thought I just created everything and did everything. I thought I just hit a button and all the data is gonna be just falling into my lap. And it technically is gonna happen. But the reality is a little bit more complicated. Like I told you before, within all of us, you have two different entities. You have the platform. So you have the All of Us platform, which is more or less Terra, that's just kind of sitting there and you can interact with, engage with, which is what we've been engaging with. Then you have the All of Us data. And that's the information, and that's somewhere else in a SQL database, a huge SQL database, I might add, that needs to talk to the platform. What you've been doing with the cohort builder and the dataset builder was basically building out this code, this SQL code that will then be used to pull the information from the database into the platform. In this case, it'll be a Jupyter Notebook platform using Python code and potentially Hail. If I wanted to do this in R, and I say, no, I want to look at this in R instead, you see how the code changed. This is now R code. It's like, cool, that's fine. We'll switch it up. So now it's going to show you the R code version of it and how to pull and curate, and how to pull the data using the R code. I will quickly go through this in a second, but I just wanted to stop to see if anybody has any questions as to what the heck is going on. Because the next steps on this is going to get a little bit more technical. So yeah, I just want to open up to anybody and get drinking water. Um, okay, I don't see anything, and I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna real quick go through how this basically works as far as like how the code works. Then we're gonna spin up an environment, and hopefully that doesn't take too long. And we'll go through and look at how you'll be visually observing all this. And just to make this a little bit easier, let me just get started with this now, actually. I'm gonna say you can copy the code if you want to and move it over to another platform. So you don't have to use Jupyter Notebook. You could use RStudio and SAS Studio and copy the code over. But I'm not saying it's basically not necessary in this case. Okay, now we are officially in the next slash the biggest slash the most complicated step of all, which is the analysis step. And you know you're in analysis step because you got code and it says analysis. So two of those things. Within here, there's a few things that you probably noticed. Number one, it's highlighted that you're in preview mode, and that's the read-only mode. From there, you see next to it says edit mode, and then it says run playground mode. I always like people to look at the preview mode. This is still free. Emphasis on the word free. So we're going because this is going to be the element when I start talking about money. So I want to make sure everybody is geared up for that. When you're in the README mode, this is the last free thing you can do. You can look through the code, you can see what's going on with it, have a general idea as to what's happening before you go into any of these two elements. Once you click edit or you click run, both of those elements will then start to pair you up within the Terra system. It's going to pair you up with a compute node that can analyze the data how you want it, or however way you want it analyzed. The compute node itself can be established or configured however way you want to within Jupyter Notebook. Within RStudio or within SAS, it is not. There's a set configuration that you can work off of. And when I say configuration, I'm speaking of the actual environments and how the environments are going to get put together in order for the Jupyter Notebook or the SAS Studio or the RStudio to be ran. So for instance, let's look at the Jupyter Notebook. In here, I can look at here and I can say, okay, if I hit edit or I hit run, it's going to start charging me 20 cents per hour. If I pause it at any point in time or it automatically pauses, it's going to charge me 1 cent per hour. And then if I were to establish a persistent disk, it's going to charge me roughly $5 a month. The charge account is going to be this number right here, which is my charge account. Then from there, the configuration is 4 CPUs, 15 gigs of RAM. The compute type is a standard virtual machine. And then from there, it automatically pauses after being idle for 30 minutes. So the default is 30 minutes. And I can adjust all of these. Last but not least, it goes into the storage options that you have, which goes up and talks about, it's essentially the persistent disk. You can do a standard disk or you can do a solid state drive. If I were to change this, and I'm saying, you know what, I want to look at genomic information. I know that it might require a little bit more oomph. I want 16 gigs. The default for 16 gigs or the least amount of RAM you can have for 16 gigs is still about 14.5, which if you're going to have 16 gigs, you probably want to have more RAM. But if you haven't noticed, this number went up. This is the cost for running it. So as you're running, every single hour that you're running it for, even if you ran for an hour and 1 minute, it's technically going to cost you 2 hours, but it's going to basically charge you almost about 75 cents, a little bit more than 75 cents to run. If I was more interested in doing something that required a cluster, so I'm going to be compartmentalizing and it's going to have multiple different nodes doing things for me. This is not going to be a virtual machine anymore. It's going to be more or less a virtual machine that's talking to several other virtual machines at the same time. The numbers change again. You see how it's just getting more and more expensive per hour. And yes, $1.42 does not sound like a lot, but you also have to compound what it's doing in the forefront and what it's doing in the background. The forefront or the forefront will be whatever you're coding and doing. The background is whatever processes is running in as you're coding things in the front. So hypothetically, let's say that you're downloading data, you're downloading genomic data, and you're also working and coding and analyzing some of the data within the demographic information or the survey information. This number is but you walked away because you had to go do something, pick your kids up from daycare, and come back later. This number is still going to keep getting charged and the process is still going to keep going. It will not go idle because the background is still running and potentially pulling in genomic information, because sometimes it takes hours, if not maybe like a day or two, to pull the amount of genomic information that people want. It just depends. And you can see here, if I were to change the amount of workers, which is basically the sub virtual machines that this thing is reading in and talking to. So now I have one main virtual machine that's talking to 5 sub virtual machines, and each of the sub virtual machines have 4 CPUs and 15 gigs of RAM and have 150 gigs of disk space in total. Again, this is each of them. Again, the number goes up. If I knew that each one of those needs to be higher, again, the number goes up. I think you all are getting the point. Which the point is, don't touch none of this if you don't know what it's doing. If you don't know what a virtual machine is, if you don't know what a data processing cluster is, if you don't know what workers are, if you don't know what CPUs are, don't touch it. Don't do it. Please don't do it. Ask somebody, ask a friend, ask me. If you send me an email, I promise you, I'll probably be able to help you out and at least point you in the right direction. But just don't do it, because this number will add up and it will go on forever and ever and ever if you do not curate this, or not curate this, but structure this the right way. I'm not trying to scare you out from using it. What I am trying to do is just prevent an accident from taking place where you overuse or you pull in a very big server or node that's not needed to do an analysis that was definitely not necessary for and waste time and money. It's not worth it. But this is what I meant when I say configuration. This is what I meant when I say cheap or not cheap, but when I say free or not. Because again, once I hit one of these, it's going to base it off of whatever the configuration is at the time, and it's going to run and create it and attach you to it. Creating the instance is more along the lines of just taking the stuff that you have in place and then pasted it into a dry new virtual machine that's not being used or occupied, and then you having access to it for however long you want to before you cancel it. If I were to hit run right now, it will start to try to spin this thing up. But for right now, just for the sake of simplicity, we are going to just keep working over here and not worry about configuring this together. But if this is something that people are more interested in, we could talk more about it a little bit later. Okay, let's talk about this code because this is always something that intimidates and is a little daunting for people. When you're looking at this code, and again, this is something that's pre-made. I did not type this up. This is stuff that, as we saw earlier, it just shot it out there for me. It was like, hey, this is what you need to get everything started. Based off of everything you told the system, this is what they've been punching in the background. Essentially what's going on here, and this is R, so anybody who's good at reading in R, you can follow along. If not, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on in here and how this all works. But please, if you have any questions, just stop me. It's completely fine. What's going on is initially it's going to be setting things up and it's going to be using the libraries tidyverse and big R query. The libraries within R is nothing more than programs that somebody or entity put together that in this case are very big programs that are designed to help you out with very specific tasks. Tidyverse is a universally used not platform, but a library that is more or less a way to work through R in a more efficient way. We'll say that. BigQuery is essentially what it is. What it sounds like is allows our programs to do larger queries, and I think it also allows it to do it in a more optimal way. But I don't use BigQuery that often, except for within all of us. So outside of all of us, I normally don't have to query big things inside of R. But essentially, what's going on is all of this is SQL code. This is not R code, but it's getting converted and pasted into a variable called datasets 33622 098 underscore persons. This is a random number that gets put together, and this is a generic data set name that or generic variable name that getting put together. The SQL just stands for SQL. So it's saying, hey, take all of this information and rename it this. If I punch this in, that represents this. Give me 1 second. Okay. And you can see it's a lot of information. After all this gets populated and gets put into this variable called dataset 33622, whatever, it then is going to do the next step, which is going to create a file path. It's going to say, hey, I want you to go in and pull in this information, which is your bucket information. Every person has a Google bucket, workspace bucket, which we will talk about in a second, and it's going to pull in that information. It's also going to combine in your BigQuery export data to it because it needs that for information. It's going to pull in the owner information, so your email that's going to be associated with it, and then after that, it's going to be curating the different names. So hey, we want to make sure we name it person this, and we want to make sure that the files that get created are going to be person this. Maybe file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many CSV files that needs to be created. So this is making a pathway, a file name and a file pathway for you for the BigQuery to then pump information into. This is just a message that's going to pop up saying that, hey, your data was written to this location, which is the pathway that was established. Use this pathway to read in the data in the future. So in the future, if you ever want to pull some information from your Google bucket using your account and your name, you use it using this pathway, which again was established right here. From there, The next step is going to be actually doing the query. So from the BigQuery package or BigQuery library, it's going to go in. It's going to read in the SQL code. It's going to read in the location there where the SQL code needs to go, which is the pathway. It's going to read in your Google information yet again, and is going to make sure it's put in place as a CSV. And it's going to basically run all this and query this information into your pathway. So it's going to take all of this from the database, move it over into where it needs to be that's associated with your account, which is your Google Cloud storage account. That's why you keep saying cloud storage as a CSV file. That's what this code is doing. If you don't run this code, what you would ultimately end up doing is you would end up having this code right here that can talk to and read the query data from the SQL data set. But you won't have any of it saved in a personal file just for you. You just be able to access it whenever you want to. But once this session is over and I get out of all of us, when I go back into it, I won't have it anymore. So this is what it's doing automatically for you. From there, what it's going to do next is it's going to create a function for you to read in the data from your Google Cloud account into your virtual machine that you're actively working on as we speak. So this is it's going to quite literally create its own function for you. The function is going to be based off of the data that you're interested in. It's going to configure the data slightly to make it a little bit more digestible. And then it's going to say that, hey, in order for you to move the information or look at this data or run anything with this data, you need to run this function first. And the function is going to be called read data query or read BigQuery export from workspace bucket. This is going to be what you need to run in order for you to pull the data from your bucket into the current virtual environment that you're in. And essentially, that's exactly what you do right here. You run this function that was just created up here. It pulls in from the pathway, which was just created up here. And we both know that it was stored properly because of the fact that this was hopefully ran correctly. And it's going to, once it brings it into the forefront and bring it into the environment in this case is Jupyter Notebook, or it could be RStudio, it's going to call it blankety blankety blank person data frame. The DF just stands for data frame. Then this is just two random little pieces of code that shows you what you can do with it, which essentially this is just the dimensions. And then this function right here is the head. So it shows you the first 5 lines of code within your overall data frame. And then anything you type after this point is just going to be whatever you want to as far as accessing, manipulating, and interpreting the data. So easy, 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 because literally all you have to do is just click anywhere on here and hit the run button, and click anywhere on here and hit the run button. And at the end of running this, which might take a few seconds to a few minutes, depending on how big your data is, you'll be able to just analyze your data. And anything that you do will be stored and placed back into your bucket. So as long as you just come back to it, you'll still be able to access this data frame that you've been manipulating, because that's a copied version of the data from the Jupyter Notebook. I mean, from the SQL database. Hopefully this is making sense, because it's going to get a little bit more technical. Now, one thing you notice is that it looks, for some weird reason, it looks like it's doing the exact same thing all over again down here. Up here, we just did this for the domain just registered as person. Down here is trying to, down here is trying to do it again, but now it's doing it for under conditions. Essentially, to make this a little bit more optimal, and so that you don't have a huge, 400 or 500 lines of code, 1,000 lines of code plus of SQL query information, they break it up to, the amount of information for different sections from the query database. One section is just the demographic and person data, which is what you just queried and pulled in right here. The other section is the condition information for those people, which is going to be queried down here. And anything beyond that is going to be potentially be another section. If I wanted to pull in another section of data, I can always just tell it, hey, I also want conditions and I want EHR data, and it will just make a whole nother list and set, and it's going to pull it all in. you can see here that they changed the name slightly. So instead of this being just dataset underscore person, it's dataset underscore conditions. Instead of this being, again, down here, person underscore 33622, blah, 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 it's conditions. Same thing over here. They changed the names a little bit to just make it a little bit like make it so that it's not breaking itself. One flaw that I always notice and I always want to make sure people are aware of is that this function will override itself every time you redo it. At least in R. Python, I think it's different. But you can see this is the exact name that we had up above. So if you were to run this set of code, then you run this set of code, and then you say, well, great, I already have this function in here. So all I have to do is just run this set of code. And then I can skip this part and just jump into here. No, because technically this function is slightly different on how it's set up than the function up above. So please keep that in mind too. Again, this is for R. I'm not saying this will take place in Python, but for R. But this is what happens after you get it downloaded and you have the copied version of the data downloaded into your bucket. You do whatever you want to it within the workspace, but you cannot, I repeat, you cannot take any data that has sensitive information outside the workspace. And when I say sensitive information, I mean any type of data that has birth dates or age or location, genomic data, raw genomic data, um, um, any kind of demographic information, anything that can be identified, can help identify somebody in the real world from the data in here cannot be pulled out. I always recommend that if you're going to pull any type of data out, you either pull out figures and tables or you pull out summary statistics. So after you run an analysis and you're like, hey, I got this p-value for this set of genes, or I did an enrichment analysis and I have this data now. That would be, you can get the summary statistics of that and you can definitely pull that out because that's a combination of results from an analysis that you did and you're just interpreting the results or you're showcasing the results of analysis. You can't take that information and then backlog it all the way down to who it was or the group of people that was from that. So just keep that in mind, and I'll keep you in good, healthy status when it comes down to all of us. Okay. So I talked about this. I talked about the code a little bit. I gave you an idea of how this works. If you were to want to analyze things in SAS, it's the same setup, but you can see it's blocked off. I can't reconfigure this. This is just how it is right now. What I can do is change the idle for date, and I can also change how big of the storage is, but nothing more than that. And you can see that it costs a little bit more money, and it costs a little bit more money to run per hour. Same thing with RStudio. I cannot change that, but I can change this information here. It costs a little bit more money here. It costs a little bit less money with the persistent disk. This has been a change. This actually cost more money before, but it looks like they dropped in price, which is nice. And then yeah, also you can run this using Cromwell. Unless you know how and what Cromwell is used for, I don't recommend you use Cromwell. Just because again, this is a platform and a style of coding that is very beneficial, especially if you're going to be doing something like workflows. But if you're not doing anything that's going to be multiple things taking place at the exact same time, or you're multi-paralleling, or multi-threading out what you're conducting or what you're trying to do, it's not necessary to use Cromwell. If in fact you don't know what or how you're running things, you just click this little thunderbolt. This is going to show you all your applications. You see, I have Jupyter Notebook, I have RStudio, I have SAS Studio, and then I have Cromwell. I'm not running anything right now, so everything is just kind of blank. If I wanted to look into, I'll go back to that in a second. But if I want to look at different storage information, like I was saying before, if you ever want to know what your Google bucket information is, you literally can just run this code right here and it will show you what your bucket information is. Same thing if you want to look at the email information too, you can just run this code and it'll show you what it is. But this is essentially, this will break down and show you how you can navigate through your own data by yourself, without anybody's help. And then last but not least, this will show you actively what's going on and what you did as far as pulling out genomic information. And then this is the last tool that you can use, which is just running everything through a terminal. You can just, if you're like me and I'm just kind of old school, so I like to run things using Bash, Yes, I code very well in Bash, and yes, it is a very old language, and yes, I'm really good at it. But if you want to code anything that way and use Shell or Bash, you can just go into the terminal and run it that way. Technically, all of this is in the same suite, but you know. So yeah, this is everything in a nutshell before we dive very, very deep into genomics specifically. So we went over workspaces, cohort builder, dataset builder, Jupyter notebook, and cost and billing. Mostly cost. We didn't go into billing quite yet, which I can show you in a second. But any questions or concerns thus far? Oh, I see a question. Because people are still able to become participants of all of us, how frequently will your data be updated with more participants? Okay. To answer this anonymous question, I will literally say it truly, I haven't found a set timestamp saying like every January 12th, is going to update new information. But what I will say is that the updates normally will advise people or say that, hey, we're going to be updating and adding another version. I've known like 2 months in advance or so. That's why I was saying that with very soon they're going to have a version 8 that comes out for all this data, which is going to be again the updated version to version 7, which will have again more people, more data, and then on top of that, they're probably going to change up how they even curated the data from the get go. Every time they change versions, there is a chance for your code to break because you're looking at your code worked for version 7, but they change variable names and things like that within version 8. So please be mindful of that. But essentially, I've noticed it's at least annually since all of us started, I've seen at least one update every single year, and they're just adding more information. This year they updated and added more data, I want to say back in like February or March, because that's when they also added in SAS and RStudio. But this, the late fall or mid fall, that's when we're going to update more participants. And then who knows when they're going to be doing it. But I'm pretty sure they're going to do another large push sometime in 2025 as well. The other cool thing that I wanted to bring up too was that they're also going to be bringing in more Latino and Hispanic data and data sets, so you can look more into the locations and the like. If anybody was interested in a little bit more into like the cultural data, I believe they have more of that. And then I also know that they're gonna be bringing in the indigenous populations within the data set and actual, I believe, genomic data on indigenous populations. So I'm not, don't quote me on that, but I know it's definitely it's going to be indigenous populations as a whole. But that's going to be another really, really, really big deal and a big push that they're going to be having. So hopefully I addressed your question. But the latest is version 7, but within the next few months is going to be version 8. And literally, when that does take place, what you would need to do is you can't update your workspace. You would have to create a new workspace, but you can duplicate your code from workspace 1 to workspace 2, where you're now looking at a new data set. Just to help people visualize this a little bit better. When I'm trying to update and edit this, I can't change the tier system, and I also cannot change the data set version inside of my workspace once I create it. I'll need to go back out and create a brand new one. And when I create the brand new one, I'll need to tell it I wanted this to be version 8. And you can still copy and paste everything else that's in here, but yeah, that's essentially how that would work. Great question. Any any more questions? So I answered that live. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into the nitty gritty that is genomic data. My background is I'm a genomicist. I have about like 8 years. No, like yeah, like 8 years of experience at this point in genomics and genetics. I do research using looking at heritability, population genomics as a whole. My PhD is in evolutionary genomics. So if you have any questions about analyses and things like that and how to go about doing things, I hopefully I have the answer. If not, I know how to get it rather quickly. So please don't be shy about asking anything that's a little bit more technical than not. But as a whole, all of us is very interesting when it comes down to genomic information. So one thing I want to show you all, well, actually two things, is the featured workspaces and then the user support hub. So, excuse me. If you were to click on the research, the user support hub, again, I just went down here. I'm just gonna jump out of it again just to make sure everybody sees it. I went over to the hamburger, flipped the hamburger sideways. I don't know what to call that now. We're just gonna call it the 3 lines. And then I went to user support hub and I clicked on that. If you were to click on that, it kicks off a new screen and then brings you to the user support hub. Personally, I actually really like this. There's a lot of data in here though, a lot of data, but it highlights it fairly well and it shows you where you need to go to get specific information on things. We want to look at genomic data. So I'm going to hit genomics. From there, you have a smorgasbord of things you can start clicking onto, and each little blue link that goes to something else, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper into the weeds. So just be mindful. You can spend some time in here. But as a whole, let's say, hey, I want to look at genomic data, but I don't know what data this whole entire system has. So I just want to see what they have just in general. Um, so from there, we're going to go to control CDR directory. This right here is the curated data repository, and it goes through and shows you every single thing that you basically need to know about the genomic data as a whole, and even how to access some of the genomic data, which in most cases is going to be this code right here. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, because unfortunately with the genomic data, they have this set up in an all or nothing type system. And I'll explain that out later as well. But essentially, what do they have? They have, and I'm just showing you, there's more over here. Actually, I'm gonna bring this right here. I wish I could make this screen a little bit smaller, but they have short read whole genome sequence data in a VDS format, VDS being a variant data set format. When I first got into all of us, I never heard of a variant data set format until I realized that that was their own unique formatted filing system that they have within all of us that you can use if you're interested in joint SNP and indel call sets of all available samples on the entire called genomic territory. Um, that essentially means if I were to pull this bad boy right now, it is a huge data set that has everybody and everybody's variant data within it to a certain degree. That is what I mean when I say it's an all or nothing. You cannot read in a small section of this, and then from there, just pull or just pull in like I just want to look at the 500 people I'm interested in. I don't need the whole data set. You normally need to pull in the full data set, pull out the 500 people, and then delete the big data set because it's going to copy in the full thing. It's always set up that way. The only time it's not set up that way is if you're using the VCF extraction tool. If you're using the VCF extraction tool, it will literally pull the VCF tables from people that you're interested in and create them and then merge them all together for you. So you'll have what is it called? Not GPS. You'll have like a complete VCF of everybody, but just those 3,200 people you want. But in this case, if you want short read sequence data for VDS, it's everybody. Same thing if you want ancillary, if you want to look at the ancillary information, this is going to be anything that's going to go from the variant annotation table, which this will go to talking about the different locations of the start and stops for different genes or not indels, genes and loci, the ancestry information. And yes, they do calculate ancestry for you. The methodology that they use to calculate ancestry is in my personal opinion, is pretty solid. They're using a principal component approach, and you can look at how they go about doing it. There's areas on how, like, see how genetic predicted ancestry and how it was predicted in a sense. And then you can have the predicted information. So they have the different ones. And this is, if I'm not mistaken, it is for super groups. I want to say super populations. So like continental, and I think it also has some sub information because they essentially are using 1,000 genomes as the reference to predict ancestry. So if you are interested in looking at ancestral data because you're like, I'm not interested in looking at race because I'm looking at whole genome data, I'm looking at genomic information, and we all know that there's some pros and cons to using race as a proxy, you should use ancestry, as a whole. This is the methodology. And if you want to go back and do it yourself, you're obviously welcome to do so. But I do recommend at least just looking into and just seeing how they went about doing it, because it will save you a lot of time and actually a lot of money. They also have QC information for everybody. They have relatedness. So if you're running something like a GWAS and you want to make sure that you're accounting for covariates such as relatedness, ancestral populations, things like that, you can use that, which I also found to be really helpful, because again, this is just stuff that typically just takes a long time to do, which you don't have to. They did it for you. And then they did it pretty well. It's not like they put it together in a bad way. They have short read exome data, which we know what exomes are. It's just all the exomic regions. Then they also have the Hell matrix data. So they have everything that I was just talking about before, but they have it in a very huge Hell matrix that you would then have to add in other components to, but you have the large Hell matrix data set at your disposal. You have VCF tables. So if you wanted to, you can pull in the large VCF tables and run with that. You have multi-allelic splits, which, if I'm not mistaken, these are because they have it broken down into several different things. I have not seen, at least I don't remember seeing anything that's like just strictly biallelic versus multi-allelic, but they do have them split out. I remember they have this all broken down in a way to help better understand it. I haven't used the multi-allelic one, so I'm not entirely sure exactly what all they mean, unless they're just strictly just talking about multi-allelic regions and how there could obviously be this genotype, or this genotype versus biallelic. But I have to double check when it comes down to splits. But when it says splits into separate records, which I don't exactly know what that means, but they have it. They have Plink, they have binary files, and they also have UCSC, which bed files generated by exomes. So I'm assuming it's probably one as a reference source that you can use that has like this large bed file that you can then use to annotate whatever you need to annotate, which I know that can be done using Plink, which if you want to swap out this with Plink, I believe you can, but I never had to use this particular type of format. But as you can see, I can keep going on and on about what they do offer and how they have it offered out. In this case, they have allele frequency or population-specific allele frequencies that are greater than 1%. So this is going to be more of a common variance. And it kind of just keeps going on because they already pulled that out. They also have ClinVar variants, so clinical variant biomarker data on different regions, and they have that broken down. I don't know how updated this is when it comes down to ClinVar, but it looks like, well, nope, it says updated 2023, so last year. So it's probably, and it said as the newest version is 7.1. So there you go. And again, I'm just saying it goes on. It has the CRAM files. It also has structural variants. It also has BAM files further down. They recently threw out the PGX haplotype caller, which I thought was actually kind of cool because that's something that's new. I don't do a whole lot of things when it comes down to pharmacogenomics, but at the same time, a haplotype caller that they already have haplotype hopefully fully pulled out for is going to be very beneficial, because other than that, normally, what at least for me, I have to go and pump my information into a server, and then the server, like, so maybe like Michigan, University of Michigan, and their server system, I have to pump it through there, and it gets a little daunting and a pain in the butt because we can't do that within here. The other thing you have to do is maybe bring in software that can then call the haplotypes for you, but it looks like they already have it pre-done. Again, have not looked into this too much, but it's still a good resource. And then I'm going to say last but not least, but I know there's more in here, is long read data. So they have structural variance data, and then they also have long read data, which was pulled out, I believe, from the short read information. So just going up here, yes. So they have, structural variance that was pulled out and annotated based off of the short read, and they have almost 100,000 people from here. But then for the long read data, they have still I think just 1,000 people. Right? It's not the biggest number. I think it's 1,000 people. But long read is really expensive. So, but if you are interested in doing long read data and looking into that, I highly recommend it. But the fact that they already do it using structural short read, I'm kind of curious to see what analyses that they use or what type of software they use. So I'm going to look into that more too, because I am interested in doing structural variance analyses. Anywho, the sky's the limit. When it comes down to it, they also have specific arrays that they pulled out for you. The main array that you can basically look at is the GDS, no, GDA, so the Global Diversity Array. GDS is the Global screening array, global screening array, GSA. That's the global screening array. That one's significantly smaller. But the global diversity array is a standard array that you can use. It has very, very, very specific markers that show majority of the variance between or the variation between humans. And what I suspect that they did was they used the whole genome data and then they pulled out the microarray data from the whole genome array information because that would probably be the cheapest method. And then they have it set up in a BCF, a Hail matrix on a Planck format if you want to utilize it. And then they have the manifest for it too, so you can actually have the manifest of the individuals and then the array information that you need. So again, a lot of genomic information. And they also go a little bit more detail about how they went about doing it, how the columns are named out for certain things that you're interested in pulling. And again, the list just goes on. When I say that they did a really good job, and I personally think they did a really good job with the genomic information and how they pre-QC'd it for you, I genuinely mean it. I'm not saying you shouldn't go back and double check it. You definitely should. That's just standard. But the fact that they just did a lot of the stuff for you and they showed you some of the code and they break it down, it's extremely helpful. Now, going all the way back up, I want to go back over here and I want to show you another big element. So I told you the users support hub, which honestly, if we were to go back in here and look over here, you can go into each and every single one of these. That wasn't the only page. They go into the exactly how to copy the cram files. They show you different workspaces that will be beneficial, which I'm going to actually talk about in a second. They even have videos, relevant videos that are, I believe, are like YouTube videos that they have on here showing you like, hey, this is how you will go about doing X, Y, and Z within all of us using the genomic data. Again, really helpful. But let's look at the featured workspaces because that's actually something that I think is underutilized and I don't know why, because it's super helpful. So within the featured workspaces, what they did, oh, they finally put the all by all in there. Nice. Within the feature workspaces, what they ended up doing was they just took concepts of or general things that people probably would find interesting or probably would want to do, and they created this full, hey, this is how we went about doing the same analysis that you might want to do underneath the tutorial and the demonstrations. In the tutorial one, this is how you would go about working through or learning how to engage with X, Y, and Z. So like in beginning intro to all of us data and Workbench, similar to how I'm going through it right now. The all by all and looking at the PFHH survey, phenotype curation, all by all being this huge analysis where they ran an extremely big GWAS looking at I think like 1,000 something phenotypes. So they did this huge GWAS component, and they have a lot of data on it within the data set called the all by all. So if you're more interested in that, then I definitely recommend it. I think the all by all is a great resource. I also think it's something that you should look into. If you don't want to run a GWAS, but you want to look at maybe some biomarkers that they've noticed within the GWAS. But one thing I would also tell you is that I think that for certain phenotypes that were a little bit more complex, you might want to be careful and don't heavily lean on the all by all. For instance, anything that has to do with like substance use or complex phenotypes like schizophrenia, like mental health, mental disorders, you might not want to lean too heavily into it because they did a huge GWAS. you might want to just recreate it your way and just maybe just use it as like a reference to see like, if you're getting even close to the same biomarkers that they got. But whatever you do is probably gonna be a little bit more complex than whatever they did with the all bio for, again, more complicated phenotypes versus less complicated phenotypes. For example, sickle cell, which is less complicated than schizophrenia. Um, yeah, these are the how-tos. And they go through how you do X, Y, and Z, how you engage with X, Y, and Z. These are not videos. These are honestly workspaces that you can then look at the code or look at, very, very well annotated and noted code snippets that you can hopefully maybe copy and paste and use in your own data sets, because this is open to everybody. If you go into demonstrations, this is like a quick demo of how you go about doing it. So that is more of a how to look at this, or how to address this concern, or how to, you know, use this platform, versus the demonstrations, which is, hey, this is the genetic ancestry. This is an example of. So all of these are like examples of how to do this. So hypothetically, if you want to do it this way, you can basically take genetic ancestry from here and just rerun the same code that they have, or similar code, but tweak things and put more things in there that be a little bit more specific to you. So they set these up so that you can have pre-existing code that you can use. And I think that that's really helpful. Again, I don't know why so many people don't look at this, but it's extremely helpful, and it will save you a lot of time. Even if the code that they have on here is not relevant to what you're trying to do, the idea of it will let you see how you need to be thinking about how you should be doing your data set within all of us. Because even though this is probably might be looking at a PCA and rerunning another PCA for genetic ancestry, I want to use, admixture. I want to use admixture. I want to calculate out the admixture within the US population for the East Coast. That's what I want to do. The initial components that I need is probably going to be within this workspace. But once I get to the point where they're actually analyzing and pulling out data, genomic data, and then analyzing it using a PCA, I'm just going to swap that out with, the admixture or structure, like the analysis called structure, depending on if I want to use maximum likelihood or Bayesian, and kind of just go with that approach. So that's an example. Same thing with like hypertension prevalence. They might be looking at prevalence, calculating it one way, and I'm just going to tweak it and change it up, calculate it another way. So 50% of it, I'm going to end up changing and doing customizing. But the other 50%, I don't have to. I actually already have how somebody who made the workspace would go about addressing this. Okay. And then they have phenotype library, which I'm not going to go into too much detail with. But one thing I did want to talk about, which this is another new element, is the community workspaces. So community workspaces is essentially what it sounds like. These are workspaces that people have put together, and they're designed, it should be designed and for multiple people to go in and converse, I believe converse with each other, and I want to say like kind of set up. So it's not as structured out. Again, this is something that I'm learning more about, but it's not as structured out as tutorial or demonstration. But this is supposed to be something that where I think multiple people can engage with each other on the same idea, the same approach. But that's something I'm still learning about. Let me see, because I think a question came up. Let's see. Oh, okay. So the question is, what is the first of all, thank you for the compliment, but what is the first step to get your feet wet to study more about this? So study more about it, I'm assuming we're referring to, and I'm just again just assumption, referring to all of us or genomics. If it's going to be all of us, then your very first step is to quite literally sign up for all of us. Go up in there. It's free for everybody. Like I said, everybody has $300. You can literally go in and sign up for it. What I can do is show you all the link that you would use to sign up. Actually, let me go ahead and I can do that right now. So course it did that. Kicked me right back to the main thing. So I'm going to sign out. And this is literally the link that you would use to join into all of us. It's the very first page. You can say either sign in, or it'll say, I don't have an account, create an account. We'll say we're going to create an account. They'll then take you to this page here. I am honored bound to say, hey, you should probably read all this. So I'm going to skip it, but you should read it. And you can see here, this is probably one of the first time you see the word Vanderbilt on here. So I want you to see, like, trust me, I wasn't blowing smoke. Vanderbilt is associated with all of this, and they do so far. I think they're doing an amazing job with the data consortium that is the all of us data. But you go down and you read all the information, and then after that, you go ahead and say, I read it, I understood it, I agree with it. Let's go to next. From there, it's going to say, hey, what is your institution? If in fact you are at an institution, which Charles Drew, I believe is, if you're at an institution where you have a DURA or a data use agreement in place with all of us, it will pop up. So if I were to type in Charles, whoop, there it is. So you got Charles Drew of medicine and science. And if I click on that, they'll say, great, what is your institutional email? I'm obviously not really associated with Charles Drew, not like that. So it wouldn't work for me. But if you type in your, John Doe at, I don't know if it's just cdu.edu, but if you have an affiliation with the institution, you can type that in. And then from there, they'll say, great, what is your role? You're an undergraduate, graduate, trainee, fellow, early career, mid-career. And then they just kind of go down the list. So you just pick whichever, which role that you are. Then you'll go to next. When you go into next, they'll ask you, and let me just go ahead and type in, say all of us. This is because I have that. And then of course my name, which if y'all don't know by now, is Javon Carter, at rti.org. It might kick me out because they're going to be like, well, you already have an association. So we're going to put down senior researcher, because that's going to be where I'm going to be at pretty soon anyway. So we'll just put that down. We'll say next, and then we'll say, okay, create a new username. Tell me what your first, your last name is, what degree you're at. From there, go into, but go ahead and type, put down your street address, information like that. I would probably put down the institution's information, to be honest with you. And then from there, your research background, experience, and you can more or less copy and paste like a chunk of your CV, or if you want to copy and paste a chunk of your from like a most recent bio sketch that you might want to use for this, you can do that. If you want to put down your bio page, you want to put in, I believe, like a LinkedIn or your own personal information for web page. If you have one of those, personally, I'll probably just put a LinkedIn page. Fill out this information. Fill out, hey, did you learn about all of us from any of these resources? If you are new, please click this one, because this is the one. This is RTI, and it makes this look a little bit better. And then from there, it's going to say next. After you hit next, from that point, it will go in and it will tell you, okay, we need to get either a driver's license number or a passport number. I want to say, I know you can do driver's license. I don't know if you can do passport, but you're definitely going to at least need something like a driver's license number, because you need to confirm with them that you are a U.S. citizen. And once that takes place, it will take maybe a few minutes. They'll send you an email saying, congratulations, you can now log in. Once you log in, the very first thing they're going to tell you to do, or the very first page you're going to see once you officially log in, and let me go ahead and sign in yet again, because I had to do this a few times. And one thing I think you notice is that once you actually create your account, the username is going to give you this new email, and this is the email you need to use to log in. So you're not going to be using your email like your institutional account to log in. It'll be this email, and they'll explain it all out. Like, it will be written out exactly how you need to do this. So there's no confusion. I've seen nobody have issues with logging in. But let's say that you, let's see, manage once you have access to the workspace and all of us, the very next thing is going to pop up and gonna say, okay, great. You have access to the platform, but you do not have access to our data. because we have to train you up on how to use it effectively, efficiently, and safely. So this is literally what's going to come up, and these are going to be X'd out when you have to go through and complete each one of these. And once you complete the training for the registered tier and the control tier, please don't forget the control tier if you want control tier access. And Dura is control tier and registered tier. Then they'll say, congratulations, you have access to individual data, identifying information removed. You have access to electronic health records, survey responses, physical measurements, which yes, I can get BMI, height, weight, how many blood tests they took, even the cholesterol amount and index within people. There's a ton of data in here. I'm only showing you a small bit because I only have 2 hours. Now, if I have 3 days, I can show you everything, but I only have 2 hours. But they show you that. They also have wearables data, which they do. I'm pretty sure you notice there's a lot of Fitbit information. And then if you do control tier, you have the genomic data and then additional demographic information like the zip code and the neighborhood disparity information or index information, things of that nature. And then last but not least, you have to sign the code of conduct, which brings me to my very last point, which is the do's and don'ts using genomic data, because this right here is important. This basically tells you, and you sign off saying that you understand the do's and don'ts. But since none of y'all have signed it yet, and you have to re-sign this every year, as you can see, I want to go through a couple of them to make sure we're all on the same page. Because once everything is grayed out and they say, you want to get started? Let's get started. And once you click on it, it'll just take you to your home page, which is this page right here. That is literally everything I just showed you, exactly what you got to do. There's nothing else that you need to do. You do the trainings, which that takes a few hours, literally about 2 hours. I'm a slow reader, so it took me 4 hours. Don't judge me. But I do think that this is very, they make it super accessible. And you also notice that for like roles, you can be a high school student if the high school has a Dura in place. So as long as they have a Dura, you can join in and you can look at this data, but you have to be sensitive to it. So with that being said, I'm going to real quick just talk about some do's and don'ts because I can't visually show you a whole lot. Maybe I can. Give me a second. Yeah, you know what? Yes, I can. Sorry about that, everybody. Let me go ahead and jump back in. This is your data user code of conduct. This is the do's and don'ts. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I want to go through a few of them that I've experienced or seen that people unfortunately broke and got the hand slapped for it. As you can see, it's relatively long, but not incredibly long. And then from there, you have to sign saying, yes, I understand do's and don'ts and what I will and will not do, and my email address, and so on and so forth. Number one, first things first, you can't send information to anybody, essentially. I know there's a lot of information here. Sorry, just know this is all here. But you can't send information to anybody. You cannot send out anything that has to do with screenshots or anything that has to do with the actual data sets themselves. You cannot send external snippets or large chunks of code to anybody outside of the workspace. If you have a colleague that you want to work with, you can literally just add them on to your workspace. You know how many people, like I said, all those workspaces you saw were workspaces that I'm working with other colleagues at other universities. They say, hey, Dr. Carter, I need help with this and this and this, or I'm wondering, I want to do this type of analysis. Hey, do you mind real quick just looking at the code and let me see what you think? All right, great. Here's my user name. If you go in here, can you go ahead and just find my username? They'll do that. And I'll show you within my workspaces. I can show you exactly how to go about doing it. So for this one, it's like I want a Fitbit one. I want to share it. And I'm like, great, I'm going to find somebody and I'm going to share it with them. And I'm just going to, let's see, Stephanie Tillman. That's one of my colleagues. She's at RTI. But I'm saying I want to share it with Stephanie. And it was like, great. After I click it on here, I go down, Stephanie's here, but she's defaulted as a reader. I can say, well, I want her to read and potentially edit some of my code because I know she's really, really good at coding in SAS, and I am not a SAS coder. So I would say I want her to be a writer, and then I'll hit save, and that's all there is to it. She's gonna get a random email from me soon saying, "Hey, you've been added on to somebody else's workspace. I don't know if you know this random guy named Javon, but he made you a reader, I mean a writer on his workspace." Simple as that. Excuse me. Um, but that's how you share the information, and it's safe and it's appropriate. If in fact you have genomic data that you want to analyze and look into, you have to be mindful that technically all genomic data, all especially raw genomic data, is PHI or PPI. So it is one of those things where it is you can find or go basically cross or what's called basically you can go back and you can look and find and look people up. If their information is in any other database, you can use those two dots to connect them together. I'm not saying that if you find some random SNP and you get a genotype from some random SNP and you pull that out, that's going to be something that's going to be used to find somebody else. Obviously, that's more or less impossible unless they have extremely rare mutation and very specific location on Earth. But what I am saying is that it's typically not going to be that. It's going to be a large set of multiple data points or something like that, and we don't want that to going out. So no raw data, only information that's been processed through. And again, summary statistics is always fine. The other do's and don'ts I like to keep in mind for people is the workspaces in general, and this is not a protection thing. This is actually just this. I'm going to save you money. Do's and don'ts. Do not copy a huge chunk of genetic information. I promise you, whatever you think the size is probably going to be bigger than what you thought. One file inside of all of us, one completely compressed file is still roughly 500 gigs of data. If you're going to get the full one, whether it's a Hail matrix or a VCF table, it can easily be 500 gigs, and that's compressed. So you can see how big it gets if it's uncompressed. It probably is somewhere about 2.6, 2.8 terabytes. You don't want to keep playing around and moving that type of data around. You need to be very, very, very smart and very strategic when it comes down to how you want to plan out your genomic analysis. Those are the analyses where I've seen people spend and burn through $700, $800 accidentally pulling in and filtering data that they did not need, nor they actually wanted, because they just didn't know. So please be mindful of that, and ask somebody, a colleague that you feel very, very close and confident and comfortable with to help you work through what you need before you pull the trigger on anything when it comes down to genomic data. Don't just think that, oh, well, I'm running an analysis, I'm just going to get everything, the whole genome, I'm just going to get all of it. If it's not necessary, it's not necessary. Like I said, if you just need array data, get the array data. If you just need to get a few SNPs, just get the few SNPs. You don't need all of that. So please keep that in mind. Another do's and don'ts that I want to keep in mind. Let's see, I'm trying to think about. Oh, configuring your nodes. So configuring your virtual machines. Do not assume that you need to have the biggest virtual machine in order to use genomic data. What I always ultimately tell people is if you're new to this and you're new to doing analyses within a platform, take whatever genetic data you think you need, get the smallest version of it. If you know you need 20,000 people, look at 120 or 200 people, something very small. If you don't know how much computational strength you need, work off the 200, get the coding to work. Once the code is work, add on, let's say, another 100 people. Make sure the code can still work if you add on 100 people. Calculate out and look at how much time it takes to do it. Then from there, go in and start tweaking the configuration as you build out the data set. I'm not saying do the same analysis 20 times with 20 variations of the size. Do it a few times with a small subset, and then kick it up to a large subset and play around with whatever analysis have the highest likelihood to crash, and make sure you adjust your configuration off of that. If you know you're using some kind of software that requires very specific parameters to run efficiently. So for instance, if you're going to be using something like, what's it called? Oh man, I used it in the past. I haven't used it in a little while. What is it called? It is from the Broad Institute. The uh it is that suite of genomic software that you can use. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I don't know why. Um oh man, it's gonna kill me. But if you're gonna be using one of the that big um genomic data software from like the Broad Institute, I know that the default for that one at one point in time was like 120 um, uh, gigs of RAM. Like it needed to have at the bare minimum 120 gigs of RAM to run. If it didn't, it would automatically crash once it gets to a certain point because it knew that it didn't have enough to run off the smallest data set. Those are the things where you might want to look into before you bring that in, before you start analyzing things within all of us, because you're going to need to adjust for that. Um, and then I guess I would say, as a whole, keep in mind when you're looking at genomic data that keep in mind, at least within all of us, when you're looking at genomic data, it's quite literally just genomic data. There is no RNA, there's no transcriptomic data, there is no uh, proteomics. You can technically use genomic data to predict out what the folding is going to be and maybe apply some proteomic software inside of here that you can then use to look into it, especially if you're interested in something like binding sites or anything like that. But it is more or less just genetic and genomic information as a whole. So I know that sometimes is uncomfortable, I mean, not uncomfortable, but unfortunate because a lot of people are like, well, I do transcriptomics. I'm looking at RNA. I want to do expression analyses, but you just can't do that inside the data set. Will that be something that takes place in the future? Potentially, I'm not entirely sure, but that is something that you just need to know whenever you're kind of thinking about your analyses that you are interested in doing. Um, and probably, the last thing, I would not underestimate exactly how many crazy things you can actually do inside of this workspace. I'm currently running a machine learning analysis within all of us, and it is working very well. It is very, very efficient. Also, you're talking to somebody who knows how to do this type of stuff, but you can do those type of things within all of us. It's just an extension of a very large compute cluster that you're working with. So you can make it more or less complicated as you see fit. So yeah, don't underestimate it. But yeah, with all that being said, that is all I got. Does anybody have any questions? And again, I hope everybody felt comfortable with asking questions as they go along. I know I've only had like a small handful, but yeah, if there's any other questions, please let me know. And thank you for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Angela, Monica, I didn't know if there's anything else that I missed or any last minute things anybody needs to know.
No, that's it. I'm sorry, my it went in and out. No, thank you, Javon, for that. I appreciate it.
No problem. Oh, one question said, what is today's session and the sessions on the 16th be recorded and accessible? Which the answer is yes, it's currently being recorded. And yes, the one on the 16th should be recorded well. And that's going to show a breakdown as the real world example of running an analysis within all of us from my colleague, Jinzo. Oh, I just realized Vincenzo was not on the opening slide. I apologize for that, but I gotta make sure I add him. So, but yes, Vincenzo is also a workbench coach and very good one. And then the other question is, how do we access them? That is, I do not know. I don't know, Angela or Monica, if you all know how to access the videos.
Yes, we will send them out and you will be able to access them. We will send it with the link and you'll be able to access them on YouTube as well.
Oh, let me on the YouTube. I probably should have wore something other than this blue shirt, but you know.
It was about the content.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Javon.